After I pushed the button, the screen went black, and when it came back, Eugene was gone and the lights were dimmed in the cafeteria. Nothing happened for the next couple of hours. I sat there watching the camera, wondering what I was supposed to do. I thought about walking away from the computer and maybe watching some television or something until the cafeteria opened back up. But it was my first day. I wanted to be on my best behavior. After a while, the lights brightened and the door on the left opened. An older guy, who I had seen before, walked in. He was pushing a mop and wheeled bucket in one hand, and he was carrying a smaller bucket in the other. The smaller bucket had some rags and a spray bottle. He walked around the cafeteria, spraying and wiping down the tables and chairs. When he finished, he walked back to the wheeled bucket and then turned to face the camera. It was like he was looking right at me. He arched an eyebrow, and I thought he was checking to be sure I was watching him. He smiled, then pantomimed a belly laugh, like he knew I couldn't hear him. He pointed at the bucket and then pointed towards the floor, where Eugene had been lying after pissing his pants. The older guy laughed again, an exaggerated belly laugh, to tell me that what happened to Eugene was a real knee slapper. Then he actually bent over and slapped his knee a couple of times. Prison must be pretty boring. Why else would this guy bother to make sure I knew he thought the whole thing was hilarious? It didn't make a lot of sense, but I just chalked it up to prison making people a little loopy. I knew he was crazy when he lightly slapped his forehead, a gesture of forgetfulness. He took the spray bottle and unscrewed the top, then poured the contents into the wheeled bucket. He turned away from me and seemed to be unzipping his fly. I think he was urinating into the spray bottle. This had to be a violation. What the hell was wrong with this guy? I pushed the button. The screen went black for about 5 seconds, and when the camera view resumed, the guy was still doing his business into the spray bottle. He finished and zipped up, then screwed the top back onto the spray bottle. He turned again to face me, and he fucking winked at the camera. I was too surprised to do anything, although I guess the only thing I could do was push the button again. I decided to call this guy Kenny, after a television character who just didn't give a fuck. I don't know exactly what his deal was, but Kenny seemed to have gotten away with the violation, since the button didn't change his behavior. He started doing a little dance around the room, then he shimmied his way back to the wheeled bucket. He scooped up some of the fluid inside with his hand and drank it. He looked at me again and gave a chef's kiss. This guy was off his nut for sure. He took the mop out of the bucket as if he was about to start mopping, but then he paused again. He laughed without facing me, and I think this was a real laugh, not a show for me. He turned towards the window and started running for it. He jumped, grabbed hold of the cage around the window, and started pulling like his life depended on it. I was so stunned that I didn't do anything for a few seconds. When my mind cleared, I pushed the button. Nothing happened. The screen did not turn black at all. Kenny pulled a few more times, then he let go and dropped to the floor. He walked back towards the middle of the room, then faced me again and gave a dramatic bow. He then held out his left hand, palm up and flat, and with a bit of a wind-up, he firmly pushed his right pointer finger into the palm of his left hand. He looked right at me and slowly shook his head. The message was clear. He knew I pushed the button, and he knew it didn't do anything to stop him. He blew me a kiss and walked through the door on the left, leaving the mop in both buckets. A couple minutes later, the lights dimmed, and the cafeteria stayed that way for the rest of the first part of my shift. Eventually, the screen went black on its own, and a countdown timer had started, signaling that I now had a 6-hour break before the second half of my shift. I looked down and saw that Mitty was curled up at my feet. I scratched behind his ears, then I got up and stretched a bit. I almost walked away before remembering I was supposed to push the other power button in between shifts. I pushed it, and the screen went totally off. My phone rang, and I realized I had spent the entire shift without looking at it once. I checked the phone, and saw that I was missing a bunch of calls and texts. Shayna was calling me now. She told me she was worried about me, and she wanted to know how the job was going. I apologized and told her I didn't hear the phone ring, and that the job was really, really weird. She snorted and said I was a goody two-shoes prison guard who turned off the phone to brown nose to the bosses. I knew she was just teasing. Still, I felt weird to have missed all those alerts. I mean, what I saw on the screen was intense, but I don't usually lose track of things like that. I told her I had the next 6 hours off before my next tour, and I asked her if she wanted to come over for lunch. She said she had to get back to her office for some big meeting, so she had to call me when she was done. I wasn't really hungry, but I made some tea and ate a few crackers. I wandered around the apartment, trying to think of something to do while waiting for my turn back at the new job. I sat on my couch and just sort of zoned out for a few hours, only snapping back when my phone rang again, this time from an unlisted number. I answered, believing it would be my contact from Human Resources, Miss Tucker. It wasn't.
You're doing quite well so far. Best not get discouraged on your first day.
The voice was hard to place. I think its owner was an older man, maybe someone from outside the country. He had a bit of an accent that was hard to pin down. I thanked him and asked who I was talking to.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. This is the warden. I wanted to check on you before you got back to your shift.
I told him I was okay, but that I had a lot of questions. My mind focused on Eugene and Kenny. Instead of telling him I had invented names for the prisoners, I just said I had seen some stuff that looked unusual.
We get a fair bit of unusual around here. New arrivals need time to adjust, and you'll have to excuse our trustees. They sometimes get a little carried away with the extra privileges they receive, and they may be tempted to play a prank or two on the new hires. Sometimes they even feel as if they are part of the staff.
I asked the warden how he knew what I meant about seeing unusual things, and he let out a small laugh.
Please forgive me. Quality assurance always monitors new hires on the first day. It's standard procedure, and they report your progress to me. Once you have proven yourself, you will be monitored less frequently.
I was being watched. Evaluated even. I knew I had to be on my best behavior.
I had better let you go. Your next shift starts in about 7 minutes. Toodles.
He ended the call, and I checked my phone. Shit, he was right. Nearly time to start again. Where did the time go? I rushed to the bathroom, then to the kitchen for another cup of tea that I carried to my desk. I pressed the button with 2 minutes to spare. The timer ticked down to 0, and then I was once again watching a dimly lit cafeteria. After a couple of minutes, the lights grew bright, and the prisoners started to walk in through the door on the left. The prison must have been co-ed. These were women. They all wore the same boring beige uniforms, and they queued in an orderly fashion. There were no Eugenes in this group. The prisoners got their food, sat down at the tables, and quietly ate their meals. When they finished, they dropped off their trays and walked out through the door. This was the kind of boring prison experience I was hoping for. No fighting, no vomiting, no need to push the button. The light stayed bright after the last of the women left. Nothing happened for a few minutes, and then I saw Kenny walk in with his mop and buckets. He put down the cleaning supplies and faced me, this time giving me an exaggerated shrug. He took the spray bottle and rag and wiped down the tables and chairs. Then he took the mop and rang it over the wheeled bucket, and he mopped the floor slowly, deliberately. He wasn't in a rush. When he finished the right half of the room, he lit a cigarette and smoked it while waiting for the floor to dry. He flicked the ash into the wheeled bucket as he smoked. When the first half was dried, he moved the bucket on that side and mopped the left side. When it was done, he waited again. I guess he wasn't a big fan of leaving streaks on the floor, and that he was waiting for the left half to dry before pushing the wheeled bucket over it. All in all, it was an orderly production, a lot less eventful than the last time I saw him. Maybe someone had talked to him about his antics. He smoked another cigarette while the left side dried. and then he walked the wheeled bucket to the door without any fanfare. Kenny backed into the push bar to open the door, and he was carefully pulling the wheeled bucket. He got about halfway out when the door suddenly slammed shut, forcing Kenny back into the room as he tripped over the bucket. The bucket tipped over and spilled onto the floor as Kenny slid on his belly into the middle of the room. Whoever shut the door on him really slammed it shut. Kenny jumped to his feet to face me, and he held up both hands with a signal, desperate plea for me to please wait. I know I said I wasn't good at lip reading, but this one was easy. It was only one word, and there was no pretense here, no joke. He was afraid, and he wanted me to help him. He took the mop and reset the bucket and started frantically trying to sop up the spill before he was caught. The only problem is, he was already caught. I saw what happened, and I knew it must have been a violation based on how Kenny responded. Seeing as he had no problem fucking with me, I had no problem pushing the button. The screen went black for about 2 minutes. When the view resumed, there was no mop, no bucket, and no Kenny. That is, unless you count the shoe that was lying sideways on the floor. I didn't get to see what happened, but I imagine the on-site officers had to drag him away for his punishment, and he lost his shoe. Poor, poor prison Cinderella. Maybe he shouldn't have pretended to urinate in the spray bottle, or fake like he was making an escaped attempt. The rest of the shift was uneventful. Nothing happened, nobody to watch, no buttons to press. The lights were dimmed for the rest of my shift, and when it was over, I turned the computer off and checked on Mitty. He was looking out the window. I put more food in his bowl, then looked at my phone and saw that my dad had called. I can't believe I missed his call too. I called him back, but it went to voicemail, so I texted him goodnight. Shayna had texted me as well to say she was going on a date with a guy from work, and she would text me if she needed an emergency phone call. I had several hours before my next shift would start. Oddly, I wasn't tired at all. I thought I would be exhausted after being up for over 18 hours, but I felt fine. Maybe the submarine schedule had something going for it. I watched some television, did some online shopping, and tried reading a book, but I kept thinking about the new job. Weird as it was, I kind of liked it. The pay was great, and I think I must have been halfway decent at it if the warden would think to call me during my first shift. The next shift started. I was back at the cafeteria, and this time, the men came in. I saw some familiar faces in the first few prisoners. The long-haired younger guy I called Sam, and the crying insurance salesman I called Eugene. They sat at the same table, but didn't even look at each other. It was very nice, very boring, exactly what I hoped to see. I noticed the last prisoner in line was Kenny. He had gotten his shoe back, and he stepped forward to get his tray. Kenny looked positively defeated. He walked to an open table and sat down. He looked at his food and started to look up, and I thought for sure he was going to look at the camera, but he stopped. He looked back down and started eating in that same robotic way the other prisoners did. I know prison food isn't supposed to taste good, but everyone here ate like they could barely stomach the meal. When they finished, the prisoners walked to the tray return at the far corner and left the cafeteria. It was very quiet, very orderly, and very uneventful. I was relieved. For the next shift, the women came in again. I hadn't given any of them names because they weren't doing anything that required recognition, but this time was different. One of the prisoners bowed her head in prayer, and another one took the opportunity to push some of her food onto Mother Teresa's tray. Knowing that I was being watched, I decided to push the button even though I thought it was kind of funny for someone to prank a prisoner in prayer. It didn't seem like a big deal, but this was still my first week. The screen went black for almost 15 minutes. When the camera resumed, the room was almost empty. Mother Teresa was lying on her table. She had some kind of funnel in her mouth, and what must have been her food had been crammed into the funnel, almost like she was being forced to swallow it. She wasn't moving. I thought she might be dead, but there's no way the on-site officers will let someone die, right? I pushed the button again, but nothing happened. I stared at her body for several minutes, and she did not seem to be breathing. After a while, the door on the left opened, and 2 prisoners walked in. One was a baldy middle-aged guy, and the other was a younger woman with a short afro. They walked over to Mother Teresa, picked her up, and carried her over to the far corner. They pushed her body into the tray return, and then the man took her tray and returned it too. They walked out as if fucking nothing weird just happened. The lights stayed bright in the empty room for a few minutes, and then the door on the left opened. Kenny walked in with a mop and buckets. He looked like shit. He gave me no theatrics, no dancing, no pantomime, no cigarettes. He cleaned the cafeteria thoroughly. When the left half of the floor was dry, he started to leave. He almost made it to the door, but he stopped and turned towards me with tears in his eyes. He gestured, his hands together, shook his head, and then put his left hand out, palm up and flat, and pushed his right finger into the palm. Please don't push the button. He didn't do anything wrong, so I didn't push the button. The screen went black anyway. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more or simply like to support my channel, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out. Until next time.